A sealed packet landed on my desk at 9:11 on a Monday morning, stamped urgent and smelling of desperate Midwestern ambition. The man who signed the proposal has no idea. The person reviewing it is the same daughter he once told would never be a real lawyer. By the time he realizes exactly whose office he is walking into, he will already be trapped in a deal he cannot charm his way out of. My name is Addison Perry, and by 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, I had already dismantled 2 acquisition offers and approved a conflict check that would likely bankrupt a mid-sized tech conglomerate. This is the rhythm of Sterling Lock Global. We do not practice law here so much as we practice architectural destruction and reconstruction. We operate out of the 44th floor of a glass monolith that looks down on the San Francisco fog like a god judging a cloudy day. My office is a sterile box of light and expensive silence. The furniture is Italian, the coffee is black, and the air conditioning is set to a temperature that discourages casual conversation. I was halfway through a briefing on a hostile takeover in the pharmaceutical sector when Tessa Vaughn knocked on the glass door. Tessa is my executive assistant, a woman who manages my schedule with the frightening efficiency of a drone strike. She does not knock unless the building is on fire, or someone has sent something that defies her rigorous screening protocols. She walked in holding a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, sealed with actual wax, and looked like an artifact from a century I had long since left behind. She placed it on the exact center of my desk, right on top of the quarterly projections. "It is weird," Tessa said, her voice dropping a decibel. "It came via courier this morning, marked urgent structural proposal. It feels oddly desperate, but professionally polished. I ran the return address. It is a firm out of St. Louis." I stopped typing. St. Louis. The name of the city hit me like a sudden drop in cabin pressure. I kept my face neutral, in this office. An expression is a liability. If you look surprised, you look unprepared. If you look angry, you look emotional. I looked bored. "Leave it," I said. "Thank you, Tessa." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, sensing a shift in the magnetic field of the room. But she is too good at her job to ask questions. She nodded and retreated, the glass door clicking shut behind her with a sound like a rifle bolt sliding home. I waited until she was gone before I touched the envelope. The paper was high quality, cotton bond, the kind old-school firms use to compensate for a lack of modern relevance. I slid my letter opener under the flap. The tear was clean. I pulled out the dossier. The cover page was embossed in gold foil, the letters raising from the page like tombstones. Perry, Whitman Keene. The air in my office seemed to thin out, making it harder to breathe. It had been 15 years since I had seen those names grouped together on anything other than a holiday card. I immediately threw in the trash. Perry, Whitman Keene, the firm that built the house I grew up in, the firm that paid for my private school tuition, the firm that my father, Grant Perry, built from the ground up on the bedrock of Midwestern stubbornness and a belief that he was the smartest man in any room he entered. I opened the folder. The smell of the paper brought a ghost of a memory, the scent of pipe tobacco and old leather books, but I pushed it down. I was not a daughter right now. I was a managing partner at one of the top 3 corporate litigation firms on the West Coast. I was a shark in a tank, and fresh meat had just been dropped in the water. I skipped the cover letter. I did not care about the pleasantries or the puffed-up rhetoric about synergy and shared values. I went straight to the numbers. A proposal like this, an unsolicited pitch for a merger or a structural partnership, is never about values. It is about survival. You do not ask a shark for a hug unless you are drowning. I ran my finger down the profit and loss statements for the last 3 fiscal years. The story they told was tragic and entirely predictable. Gross revenue was down 12% year over year. That was the first bleed. It meant their client base was dying off or moving to bigger, faster firms like mine. I looked at the overhead costs. They were rising. Rent in downtown St. Louis, likely in a building they refused to leave because of sentimental attachment to the view. Salaries for senior partners who likely hadn't tried a case in 5 years but still drew checks like they were winning daily verdicts. I turned the page to the litigation pipeline. This is the heartbeat of any firm. If you do not have cases scheduled for trial, you do not have a future. The pipeline was anemic. A few insurance defense cases, some estate disputes, a handful of mid-level corporate contracts, nothing that generated the kind of 8-figure fees Sterling Lock demanded. They were coasting on fumes. Then I saw it. Page 14, line item 6. It was buried under a generic heading, something innocuous like miscellaneous operational reserves, but the number next to it was not innocuous. $2.4 million. I stopped. I leaned closer to the page. $2.4 million set aside in a cash reserve during a year where revenue was down 12%. That made no sense. When a firm is bleeding, you do not hoard cash in a miscellaneous fund unless you are terrified of something. You use that cash to pay bonuses, to retain talent, to update your ancient technology. You do not park it unless you are expecting a hit, a big one. This was a contingency reserve. They were hiding a liability. I flipped to the back of the packet to see the signatories. I needed to see their names in ink. There they were. Grant Perry, founding partner. The signature was exactly as I remembered it. Spiky, aggressive, taking up more space than it needed. Howard Keene, the charmer, the man who used to give me peppermint candies and tell me I should marry a doctor because law was too ugly for pretty girls. Marion Whitman, the pragmatist, the one who watched and calculated and never said a word unless it was to cut someone down. They were all there, all senior, all aging, all cornered. They had no idea. They had absolutely no idea who was sitting in this office. The letter was addressed to the managing partner of Sterling Lock. My name is on the door. But to men like Grant Perry, the West Coast is a foreign country, and Sterling Lock is just a faceless entity with deep pockets. He probably had an associate look up the biggest firms in San Francisco and blindly fire off this packet, hoping someone would be impressed by the legacy of a 100-year-old Missouri firm. He did not know he was mailing his surrender to the girl he told would never be a real lawyer. My hand tightened on the edge of the folder. I could feel the pulse in my wrist thumping against the sharp edge of the paper. I remembered the dinner table. I remembered the way he would look right through me to talk to my brother, Dylan. I remembered the heavy, suffocating weight of his disappointment when I told him I wanted to litigate. You are too soft. Addison, you do not have the stomach for the fight. You are administrative material. Maybe. But a real lawyer? No. I looked at the revenue decline again. 12%. Who is soft now? Dad? I closed the folder. The sound was sharp. Final. I stared at the leather cover for a long moment, letting the cold logic of the situation wash over the heat of the memory. This was not a family reunion. This was business. And in business, leverage is oxygen. Right now, they were suffocating, and I was the only one holding a tank of air. I reached for the phone and pressed the speed dial for Tessa. She picked up on the first ring. Yes. Ms. Perry? I kept my voice flat, stripped of any curiosity or excitement. Schedule a full presentation for the Perry. Whitman Keene proposal. Put it on the books for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Tomorrow? Tessa sounded surprised. That is very short notice. I will have to clear your afternoon. Clear it, I said. And Tessa? Yes? I want you to send a confirmation to the contact listed on the proposal. Tell them the managing partner has reviewed the preliminary materials and is interested in a structural discussion. Do not give them my name. Just say the managing partner. Use the generic executive office email signature. Understood, Tessa said. She was typing as we spoke. I could hear the rapid-fire click of her mechanical keyboard, and I want every senior partner from their side present. I added, Grant Perry, Howard Keene, and Marion Whitman. If any one of them cannot make the flight, tell them not to bother coming. Got it, Tessa said. Anything else? Yes. I looked out the window. The fog was breaking, revealing the steel skeleton of the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance. I need you to run a background sweep on their firm. Not a standard credit check. I want a deep dive. I paused, calculating exactly what I needed. I want you to look for malpractice claims that haven't hit the public docket yet. Look for insurance settlements. Look for quiet resignations of junior partners in the last 6 months. And I want you to look for any recent correspondence with the Missouri Bar Association regarding ethics violations. Tessa paused. That is a heavy lift for 24 hours. I pay our external investigators $3,000 an hour to be heavy lifters. I said, tell them to prioritize the insurance history. That $2 million reserve is sitting there for a reason, and I want to know whose body is buried under it before I walk into that conference room. Consider it done. Tessa said. I hung up. Silence rushed back into the room, but it felt different now. It was charged. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. San Francisco sprawled out below me, a grid of ambition and money. I had fought for every inch of ground I held in this city. I had worked 80-hour weeks until my eyes burned and my social life evaporated. I had taken the hardest cases, the ones the men in this firm didn't want because they were too complex or too risky, and I had won them. I had built a reputation as an ice queen, a woman who argued with a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. I had done it all to prove a ghost wrong, and now the ghost was knocking on my door, hat in hand, asking for money. I turned back to the desk. The folder lay there, innocuous and deadly. I imagined Grant Perry sitting in his mahogany-paneled office in St. Louis, probably drinking a scotch he wasn't supposed to have, telling Howard and Marion that this was the right move, that Sterling Locke would be lucky to have their pedigree, that they could charm the West Coast partners, get a cash infusion, and keep playing lawyer for another decade without changing a single thing about their archaic, toxic culture. He thought he was walking into a negotiation. He thought he was going to sit across from some stranger who would respect his gray hair and his war stories. He was walking into a buzzsaw. I picked up the packet one last time, flipping it open to the signature page. I traced the line of his name with my eyes. Grant Perry. The man who made me feel small so he could feel big. I let a smile touch my face. It was not a nice smile. It was small, private, and terrifyingly calm. It was the smile of a predator who has just realized the prey is limping. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Let us talk terms. The signature on the page was not just ink. It was a portal. Staring at Grant Perry's name, I was no longer on the 44th floor of a skyscraper in San Francisco. I was pulled back through the years, dragged against my will to a backyard in St. Louis, under the heavy, humid canopy of a Midwestern summer. I was 9 years old. The air smelled of charcoal smoke and cut grass. My father was holding court by the grill, a spatula in one hand and a scotch in the other, surrounded by the men who made up the orbit of his life. They were loud, confident men who wore polo shirts that stretched tight over their stomachs and laughed with their whole bodies. I was sitting on the edge of the patio, my legs dangling, trying to make myself invisible while simultaneously desperate to be seen. My brother, Dylan, was running across the lawn. He was 12, athletic, and loud. He had just caught a football thrown by one of the associates, and my father pointed the spatula at him like a scepter. Look at him, my father boomed. That is a closing argument on legs. He's going to be a killer in the courtroom. You can see it in the way he moves. The kid has the instinct. He is the future litigator of the family. One of the men, perhaps it was Howard Keene, looked over at me. What about the little lady? Howard asked. Is she going to join the firm too? My father glanced at me. It was a cursory look, the kind you give to a piece of furniture you have seen 1,000 times. Addison? He laughed, and the sound was like gravel shaking in a tin can. She is too sweet for the law. Look at her. She would apologize to the jury for taking up their time. No, Addison is going to find a nice husband and run a charity. She is not built for the Shark Tank. He turned back to the grill, dismissing my entire potential with a single, careless sentence. I remember looking down at my knees, feeling a hot, prickly shame rising up my neck. I did not want to run a charity. I wanted to be like him. But even at 9, I understood the hierarchy. Dylan was the heir. I was the spare parts. That dynamic became the architecture of my adolescence. Every achievement I brought home was treated not as a victory, but as a pleasant surprise, like a dog learning to walk on its hind legs. I joined the debate team in high school. I spent weeks preparing for the state finals, memorizing case law and practicing my rebuttals until my throat was raw. When I won the state championship, I brought the trophy home and placed it on the kitchen island. My father walked in, loosened his tie, and glanced at it. "Nice hardware," he said, pouring himself a drink. "I won, Dad," I said, waiting for the pride to hit his eyes. I decimated the other team. They couldn't touch my logic. "That is nice." "Honey," he said, taking a sip. "But remember, debate is just talking. It is a game. Real law is war. It is about blood and leverage. Dylan made varsity soccer. Did you hear? Now that is a fight." The trophy stayed on the counter for 2 days until my mother moved it to a shelf in the den. Placing it behind a stack of National Geographic magazines, the pattern held through college. I graduated summa cum laude, a distinction that earned me a nod and a check for $500, while Dylan's acceptance into a middling law school was celebrated with a dinner at the finest steakhouse in the city. But the true fracture, the moment that finally broke the bone so it could never heal right, happened during my second year of law school. I had secured a summer internship with a federal judge. It was a coveted spot, one that students clawed each other's eyes out to get. I had beaten out 300 applicants. I was proud. For the first time, I felt like I had something undeniable, something he could not wave away with a, "That is nice," but I called him to tell him the news. "Dad, I got the clerkship with Judge Harrison," I said, breathless. There was a pause on the line. "Harrison?" he asked. "The old guy in the 5th District?" "Yes, it is a huge deal." "Dad, well, it is a cute experience," he said. "Cute." The word hit me like a slap. "It will look good on a resume." "Addison," he continued, "but clerks just fetch coffee and summarize briefs. You are not actually litigating. You are a secretary with a law degree. Don't let it go to your head." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall for an hour. Cute. He had reduced 6 months of sleepless nights and ferocious competition to a word used for puppies and toddlers. But the final blow came a year later. I was visiting home for the holidays. My father insisted on taking me to a dinner with his partners. He said it was time I saw how the big dogs ate. I thought, foolishly, that this was my entry point. I thought he was finally inviting me to the table. We were at a private club downtown. The room was dark, smelling of cedar and expensive red wine. Grant sat at the head of the table, flanked by Howard Keene and Marion Whitman. I was seated at the far end, next to a junior associate who spent the entire meal trying to flirt with me by explaining the concept of tort reform as if I were a child. Halfway through the meal, the conversation turned to the future of the firm. "We need new blood," Marion said. "We need killers." Grant laughed. He was on his 3rd scotch. His face was flushed. "Well, we have Dylan coming up," he said. "The boy is a natural. He argues with me about the color of the sky just for sport. That is what you need. Aggression." Howard looked down the table at me. "What about Addison?" he asked. "She is top of her class." "Grant, she might be the sharpest one you have produced." The table went quiet. All eyes turned to my father. I held my breath. This was it. This was the moment he could claim me. My father smiled, a lazy, patronizing tilt of his lips. "Addison?" He chuckled. "Look, I love my daughter. She is a bright girl. But let us be honest. She is too soft for real litigation. Can you imagine her in a settlement conference with the union reps? They would eat her alive. She would cry if opposing counsel raised his voice." He looked right at me, his eyes glassy and amused. "No, Addison is going to make a great in-house counsel for a bakery someday. Something low stakes. She does not have the stomach for the real work." Laughter rippled around the table. It wasn't malicious laughter. It was worse. It was knowing. They were laughing because they accepted his premise. They looked at me and saw exactly what he told them to see. A fragile thing. A girl playing dress-up in a suit. My silence burned. It started in my chest. A hot, white coal that seared through my lungs and up into my throat. I smiled. I forced the muscles of my face to hold a shape that looked like pleasantry. But inside, something was collapsing. The scaffolding of my love for him, the desperate, structural need for his approval, finally gave way. I excused myself before dessert. I told them I had a headache. I walked out to the parking lot. It was snowing. Big, wet flakes that melted as soon as they hit the pavement. I sat in my rental car, shivering, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I did not cry. He had said I would cry, so I refused to shed a single tear. Instead, I made a vow. It did not feel like anger. Anger is hot and messy. This felt cold. It felt like oxygen rushing into a room that had been sealed for 20 years. I said it out loud to the empty car. I will never beg for his approval again. I drove away from that restaurant, and in a spiritual sense, I never went back. I finished law school with a new focus. I stopped looking for the flashy, theatrical roles that my father glorified. I stopped caring about the courtroom drama. I turned my eyes toward corporate litigation. I chose it because it was cold. I chose it because it rewarded precision and punished sentimentality. In corporate law, nobody cares about your personality or your gender or your instinct. They care about the contract. They care about the statute. They care about who can read the fine print and find the knife hidden in the commas. I moved to San Francisco the day after graduation. I did not ask for his help. I did not ask for his contacts. I joined a firm that was known for eating its young, and I thrived. I developed a style that baffled my opponents. I did not scream. I did not pound the table. I simply knew the facts better than they did. I became known for calm pressure. I would sit in meetings, perfectly still, and lay out the reality of my opponent's position until they had no choice but to fold. I did not raise my voice. I raised the stakes. I stopped calling home. At first, my mother, Elaine, tried to bridge the gap. She would call on Sundays. Her voice tight with the strain of pretending everything was normal. She would give me weather updates. She would tell me who died and who got married. She never mentioned the silence from my father, and I never asked. "How is work?" "Honey?" she would ask. "Busy." I would say, "Your father is busy too." She would offer, "A tentative olive branch. I am sure he is." I would reply, and then I would find a reason to get off the phone. Over the years, the calls became less frequent. They turned into texts, then emails. Now, we communicated in careful fragments. Holiday pleasantries, birthday cards signed with love but devoid of warmth. Nothing that healed, nothing that touched the scar tissue. 10 years passed, then 15. I rose. I made partner in 7 years. A record at Sterling Lock. I brought in clients whose market cap exceeded the GDP of small countries. I bought my apartment with the view of the bay. I built a life that was impenetrable, a fortress of success that no one could question. And all the while, my father stayed in his orbit in St. Louis. I knew he kept tabs on me, in a vague, distant way, but he was convinced I had plateaued. He likely told his friends I was doing paperwork in a glass tower, safe and sound, far away from the real lawyers. He had to believe that. His entire worldview depended on it. Back in the present, I looked down at the proposal on my desk. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. He did not just underestimate me. That would have been a simple mistake. No, it was deeper than that. He had built his whole identity on the certainty of my inferiority. He needed me to be weak so he could be strong. He needed Dylan to be the genius and me to be the audience. If I was powerful, if I was a real lawyer, then his judgment was flawed. And Grant Perry did not make flaws. I ran my thumb over the gold foil of the firm's name. He had written me off to protect his own ego. And now, that ego was starving. It had consumed his firm, eaten through his reserves, and driven him to the brink of ruin, and in his desperation, he had reached out to the one place he thought was safe, a big, faceless corporate firm where he could get a check and keep pretending he was a king. He thought he was safe. I picked up my pen. The weight of it felt good in my hand. Solid, real. He was about to find out just how real I had become. By 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, My internal strategy team had dissected Perry. Whitman Keene down to the cellular level. We met in the war room adjacent to my office. The table was covered in tablets and digital projection sheets, the air humming with the quiet, lethal efficiency that I demanded from my staff. These were not the kind of lawyers my father hired. Men who relied on golf handicaps and alumni networks to get by. These were data predators. They were 26, 27 years old. Ivy League graduates who spoke in algorithms and risk ratios. Jason, my lead analyst, projected the first slide onto the glass wall. "The client base is loyal," Jason said, tapping the screen, "but it is geriatric." He did not mean that as a metaphor. We ran a demographic sweep of their top 50 billing clients. He continued, 70% of their revenue comes from family-owned businesses where the patriarch is over the age of 75. As these owners pass away or sell to private equity, the loyalty evaporates. The successors do not hire the family lawyer. They hire the firm that handled the acquisition. That means us, or firms like us. Perry. Whitman Keene is not losing clients to competition. They are losing them to mortality. I nodded, taking a sip of water. It was exactly what I expected. My father's firm was a country club that was slowly running out of members. "What about the bench?" I asked. "Thin," Jason said. He swiped to the next graphic. It showed a hollowed-out pyramid. They have the 3 senior partners at the top. Perry, Whitman, and Keene. Then there is a massive gap. No junior partners, no senior associates with more than 6 years of experience. They have a high turnover rate for anyone who stays longer than 3 years. "Why?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Glass ceiling," Jason said. "The senior partners hoard the client relationships. They do not share origination credit. Young talent leaves because there is no path to equity. They are basically running a paralegal pool and calling it a law firm. And the succession plan?" Jason hesitated. He pulled up a single name. "Dylan Perry," he said. Seeing my brother's name glowing on the glass wall sent a strange, cold spike through my chest. "He is the only one with a clear track to partnership," Jason explained, "but the metrics are cosmetic. His billable hours are respectable, but his win rate in contested motions is below the state average. He is being carried. If you remove the Perry name, he is a 4th-year associate at a mid-tier firm, not a managing partner in waiting." I kept my face entirely still. My father's closing argument on legs was, statistically speaking, mediocre. It was not a surprise. But it was a validation that felt like a weight settling in my stomach. "Is there anything else?" I asked. Jason glanced at the other analyst. "A young woman named Sarah." She nodded. "We got a conflict check alert this morning," Sarah said. She slid a document across the table. "It is a low-level hit," she said, "but it is weird." Perry. Whitman Keene recently appeared on a transaction adjacent to one of our major clients, Kensington Heavy Industries. I looked at the file. Kensington was a massive logistics conglomerate we had represented for 5 years. Adjacent how? I asked. They represented a regional trucking subcontractor that Kensington acquired 3 months ago. Sarah explained. It was a small deal, barely $2 million, but the paperwork shows that Perry Whitman handled the due diligence for the seller. I narrowed my eyes, and the deal closed too fast. Sarah said, the environmental impact reports were waived, the liability shield was standard, but the indemnity cap was unusually low for a transport company. I stared at the document, in the world of high-stakes corporate law. Adjacent can mean a coincidence. It often does, but sometimes, adjacent means a problem pretending to be paperwork. A rush deal with waived reports usually meant someone was trying to bury something before the ink dried, if my father's firm was pushing through sloppy deals to generate quick fees. That was not just incompetence. That was desperation. Flag it. I said, do not mention it in the meeting, but I want a full audit of that transaction by the end of the day. If they buried a liability in a company my client just bought, that is not a merger. That is a Trojan horse. The team nodded and dispersed, leaving me alone with the ghosts of Saint, Lewis, and the cold, hard data of their decline. At 1:45 in the afternoon, I called Tessa. "Where are we putting them?" I asked. "Conference room 4 is set up with coffee and—" "No," I interrupted. "Move it to conference room 9. Tessa paused. "Room 9? That is the fishbowl." "Exactly." I said, "Conference room 9 was my favorite weapon. It was located on the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides. The view was spectacular, a dizzying drop down to the financial district and the bay beyond. But the room itself was designed to intimidate. The table was a single slab of black marble, 20 feet long. The chairs were low-backed and modern, offering no place to hide. The acoustics were sharp, every throat clear. Every nervous shuffle of paper sounded like a gunshot. It was a room that made people feel small. It made them feel exposed. And I planned to arrive late. I added, "How late?" Tessa asked. 7 minutes. I said, 7 minutes is a specific amount of time. 5 minutes is a standard delay. People assume you were on a call or in the restroom. 10 minutes is rude. It signals disrespect and puts people on the defensive. But 7 minutes? 7 minutes is confusing. It is long enough to make them check their watches and wonder if they have the wrong time, but not long enough to justify anger. It creates a vacuum of uncertainty. It forces them to sit in that glass box, staring at the view, feeling the silence stretch out until it becomes uncomfortable. At 2 o'clock, Tessa messaged me. "They are seated." I sat in my office and waited. I reviewed a lease agreement I had already memorized. I watched the second hand on the clock sweep around the dial. 1 minute, 2 minutes. I imagined them sitting there. Grant would be at the head of the table, assuming it was his right. Howard would be making small talk with the heir. Marion would be perfectly still. 5 minutes, 6 minutes. At 6 minutes and 45 seconds, I stood up. I smoothed the front of my suit. It was a charcoal gray bespoke piece, tailored to a millimeter of my life, sharp enough to cut glass. I picked up the folder, the one containing their desperate proposal and the autopsy of their failures, and walked out the door. I walked down the hallway with the steady, rhythmic click of heels on polished concrete. I did not hurry. I breathed in the conditioned air of the firm I helped build, the empire that I commanded. I reached the door to conference room 9. I paused for 1 second, composing my face into a mask of absolute, professional indifference. Then, I pushed the door open. The conversation inside died instantly. They were there. For a moment, the visual shock of seeing them in my world was almost disorienting. They looked like characters from a period piece who had wandered onto the set of a science fiction movie. Grant Perry stood up first. He was older. That was the first thing that hit me. The man who had loomed over my childhood like a titan was smaller now. His suit, a navy pinstripe that was likely expensive 10 years ago, looked boxy and dated compared to the sleek silhouettes of San Francisco. His hair was thinner, white rather than gray, but his posture was the same, chest out, chin up, leading with his jaw. Howard Keene scrambled to his feet next. He was heavier, his face flushed and shiny. He was sweating. He offered a smile that was too wide, too eager. The sweating charm my assistant had noted was palpable. He looked like a man trying to sell a used car to an astronaut, and Marion Whitman. She rose slowly, gracefully. She had not aged so much as she had hardened. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and watchful. She was the only one who didn't look like she was performing. She looked like she was assessing the exits. Grant stepped forward, extending his hand across the vast expanse of the black marble table. He moved with the entitlement of a man who has never waited for anyone in his life. "Good afternoon," he boomed. His voice was exactly the same, deep, resonant, designed to fill a courtroom. "We appreciate you making the time. I am Grant Perry." He did not look at me, not really. He looked at the managing partner. He looked at the suit, the office, the view. He saw a functionary. He saw a checkbook. I took his hand. His grip was firm, practiced. My hand was cool and dry. I let the handshake linger for a fraction of a second too long, just enough to make him slightly uncomfortable. Before I pulled back, I turned to the others. Howard Keene, Howard said, practically lunging to shake my hand. Wonderful facility you have here. Just breathtaking. Marion Whitman, Marion said, nodding once. Her gaze lingered on my face for a second, a flicker of curiosity, but she said nothing. I walked to the head of the table, the side opposite Grant. I placed the folder down on the marble. The sound was a soft slap that echoed in the quiet room. I remained standing. They were still standing, unsure if they had permission to sit. This was the power dynamic I wanted. I was the host. I controlled the gravity. I looked directly at Grant. I looked into the eyes that had dismissed me 1,000 times. I looked for a spark, a dawn of realization. Addison Perry. I said. My voice was clear. It was not the voice of the 9-year-old girl asking to sit in the front row. It was the voice of a woman who negotiated billion-dollar mergers before breakfast. Managing partner, I added. I watched his face. There was a flicker. It was a tiny, microscopic twitch in the corner of his eye. His brain processed the name Perry. It processed the name Addison, but it did not land. I could see the cognitive dissonance working in real time. To Grant Perry, Addison Perry was a disappointment. She was a soft-hearted girl who probably worked in a cubicle somewhere, or maybe for a nonprofit. She was not this woman. She was not the managing partner of Sterling Lock Global. He assumed it was a coincidence, a common name, a distant relation. The universe is full of Perrys. His smile didn't falter, but it became slightly glazed. The smile of a man who is hearing something that doesn't quite fit but is too polite, or too focused on money, to question it. Ms. Perry, he said, nodding as if acknowledging a shared clerical error. A pleasure. It is always good to see a familiar name in the industry. He didn't know. He truly, absolutely did not know. The insult was so profound, so absolute, that it almost made me laugh. He had erased me so thoroughly from his concept of power that he couldn't recognize his own daughter when she was standing in front of him, holding the keys to his survival. Howard Keene didn't react at all. He was too busy looking at the view. Marion, however, frowned slightly. Her eyes darted from my face to Grant's, then back to mine. She sensed something, a vibration, but she stayed silent. Please, sit, I said. I sat down, and they followed suit, sinking into the low chairs. The table was so wide that we felt miles apart. I opened the folder. I did not offer them coffee. I did not ask about their flight. I did not engage in the ritualistic 3 minutes of weather talk that Midwesterners thrive on. I looked at the three of them, the father who rejected me, the uncle figure who mocked me, and the partner who watched it happen. Walk me through why you believe you are a strategic fit. I said. My tone was flat. It was an invitation to dance on a minefield. Grant straightened his tie. He cleared his throat. He put on his courtroom face, the mask of the great orator. He had no idea that the judge, the jury, and the executioner were all the same person, and she had been preparing for this case for 20 years. Grant leaned back in his chair, tenting his fingers over his tie. He looked comfortable, or at least he was performing comfort. He began his pitch with the practiced cadence of a man who has given the same after-dinner speech for 30 years. Ms. Perry, he started, his voice rolling out like a drumbeat. You have built an impressive operation here. We have read the trade journals. Sterling and Locke is a machine, but a machine needs a soul. It needs roots. Perry, Whitman and Keene has been a pillar of the Missouri legal community for nearly 80 years. We do not just practice law, we steward it. He gestured vaguely toward the window, as if the fog of San Francisco could be cleared by the sheer force of his Midwestern values. We have relationships with the bench that go back 3 generations. He continued, when we walk into a courtroom in St. Louis or Jefferson City, we are not just lawyers, we are institutions. Judges trust us. Juries understand us. We bring a credibility that you cannot buy with marketing budgets or glass towers. What we are offering is a bridge. We give you the heartland. You give us the global reach. It is a perfect marriage of tradition and scale. He smiled. a wide, magnanimous expression that expected applause. Howard Keene nodded vigorously, like a bobblehead on a dashboard. Marion Whitman just watched me, her hands folded perfectly still on the table. I let the silence hang for 5 seconds. In a negotiation, 5 seconds is a lifetime. I watched Grant's smile falter just a fraction. He shifted in his seat, the leather creaking under him. That is a compelling narrative. Mr. Perry, I said finally. My voice was devoid of any inflection. It was the voice of a calculator. But tradition does not pay the lease, and credibility does not cover payroll. I opened the folder in front of me. I did not look at them. I looked at the data. I am looking at your financials for the last 4 quarters. I said, you have mentioned your relationships with the bench, but your trial win rate has dropped 18% in 2 years. You talk about being an institution, but your gross revenue has contracted by 12% consecutively. That is not a stable institution. That is a collapsing one. Grant's face tightened. He waved a hand dismissively. The market has been soft, he said. Everyone is feeling the pinch. We are restructuring. That is why we are here, to modernize. I turned the page. Let us talk about that restructuring. I said, specifically, let us talk about page 14, line item 6. I looked up. I locked eyes with Howard Keene. He blinked rapidly. You have listed $2.4 million under a generic contingency reserve. I said, in a year where you are cutting administrative staff and freezing associate bonuses, you have managed to park nearly $2.5 million in cash. That is an enormous amount of liquidity to immobilize unless you are expecting a catastrophic hit. Keene cleared his throat. It sounded wet. Well, you know, market volatility. Keene stammered. We like to be conservative. It is a rainy day fund. We want to ensure we have capital for strategic acquisitions. I did not blink. You do not use a contingency reserve for acquisitions. Mr. Keene, I said, you use capital expenditure funds. Contingency is for liability. I turned my gaze to Marion. She was the smartest of the 3. She knew I knew. Marion, I asked, why is there $2.4 million sitting in a silo? Marion sighed. It was a small sound, almost imperceptible. We prepared for an insurance complication, she said. Her voice was steady, but tight. We have a matter that required a higher deductible threshold than our current policy covers. We are self-insuring against a potential gap. I leaned forward. A complication. I repeated. That is a very polite word. So, there is a claim. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed, a low static noise that felt like it was scraping against the glass walls. Grant looked at Marion, then back at me. His jaw was set hard. It is a nuisance claim, Grant said sharply. A former client who is unhappy with a settlement result. It is standard operating procedure. We will crush it in summary judgment. It is nothing. If it were nothing, it would not require a $2.4 million shield. I said, and if it were standard, it would be disclosed in your opening brief, not hidden in a footnote. I closed the section of the file with a deliberate slowness. We will circle back to that, I said, because if I am buying a firm, I am not buying your lawsuits, I am buying your talent. I pulled out a second sheet of paper. It was a graph, color-coded in stark red and black. Let us talk about your people, I said, specifically, your associates. Grant relaxed slightly. This was ground he felt he could defend. We have the best culture in the Midwest, he declared. We treat our people like family. We do not run a sweatshop like the coastal firms. We mentor them. We teach them the craft. The craft. I repeated. I looked at the graph. Your retention rate for associates between years 3 and 5 is 14%, I said. Grant froze. 14%. I said again. That is not a culture. That is an exodus. In the last 18 months, you have lost 12 litigation associates. These are people you spent years training. They walked out the door. Why? Grant bristled. He sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. Young people today lack stamina, he said. They want instant gratification. They do not want to put in the hours to learn the ropes. They leave because they think the grass is greener. They want the big tech salaries without doing the real work. I slid a single piece of paper across the black marble. It traveled smoothly, stopping exactly in front of Grant. It was a list of names. Those are the 12 associates who left. I said. Grant looked down at the paper. He didn't read it. He just stared at it as if it were an insult. I had my team track where they went. I said. I pointed to the column on the right. 6 of them went to regional boutique firms. 3 of them went to the public defender's office. 2 of them left the law entirely to work in nonprofits. Only 1 went to a larger firm. I paused to let the data sink in. They are not leaving for money. Mr. Perry, I said, they are not leaving for prestige. They are going to smaller firms. They are taking pay cuts. They are going to places with fewer resources and lower ceilings. I leaned back in my chair. People do not leave a winning team to join a losing one unless the winning team is toxic. I said, they are not running toward money. They are running away from you. Grant's face turned a mottled shade of red. We have trained excellent lawyers, he snapped. His voice echoed off the glass. Some of the best litigators in the state started at our firm. We gave them their foundation. Training is not the same as keeping them, I replied. My voice remained soft, cool, contrasting with his heat. You are running a finishing school for your competitors. You are bearing the cost of their mistakes during their learning years, and then as soon as they become profitable, they flee. That is a broken business model. I saw Howard Keene wince. He knew it was true. He was likely the one dealing with the exit interviews, the one hearing the polite lies about work-life balance, while the associates packed their boxes with shaking hands. So, I continued, relentless. You have no bench. Your middle management is non-existent. Who is the future? If I sign this deal, who runs the firm in 5 years when the 3 of you decide to retire? The 3 of them exchanged a look. It was a look of rehearsed confidence. We have a succession plan, Grant said. He regained some of his bluster. We have a clear heir apparent. He has been groomed for leadership since the day he passed the bar. He smiled. Dylan Perry, he said. The name hung in the air. He is a partner? I asked. He is a senior associate on the partnership track. Grant corrected. We are voting him in next quarter. He is exceptional. He has the Perry instinct. He is the continuity this firm needs. I looked at Grant. I really looked at him. I saw the delusion behind his eyes. He truly believed it. He believed that because Dylan was his son, because Dylan was a man, because Dylan played sports and slapped backs, that he was capable of saving a sinking ship. I looked down at my file. I had Dylan's performance reviews. I had his billing sheets. I had the emails he sent from his private account, apologizing to clients for missed deadlines. I looked back up. One name is not a plan. Mr. Perry, I said. I let my gaze drift over to the window, to the vast, competent city outside. It is a prayer, I said. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a balloon deflating. Grant slammed his hand on the table. It was not a violent slam, but it was loud. Now see here, he said, his voice rising. You are looking at spreadsheets. You do not know the man. You do not know the bloodline. Dylan is a force, and frankly, I resent the implication that our legacy is built on a prayer. We came here in good faith to discuss a partnership, a merger of equals. Equals? I asked. Yes, equals, Grant insisted. We bring the history. You bring the capital. We keep our autonomy. We keep our name. And we share the profits. That is the proposal. Partnership equality. He was demanding respect. He was demanding that I treat his crumbling, hollowed-out kingdom as if it were equal to the empire I sat atop. He wanted me to validate his life's work. I looked at him with a profound lack of sympathy. I closed the folder. The sound was final, like a gavel. I rested my hands on top of the leather cover. Mr. Perry, I said, you have declining revenue, a hidden insurance liability of over $2 million, a staffing attrition rate that suggests systemic management failure, and a succession plan that rests entirely on one unproven relative. I stood up. I am not seeing a business case, I said. Grant stood up too. He was shaking, not from fear, but from indignation. He was not used to being spoken to this way, especially not by a woman. Especially not by a woman who looked vaguely familiar. In a way he couldn't quite place, but whom he assumed was just another corporate shark. He did not know the shark was his own creation. He opened his mouth to speak, to bluster, to demand, but I cut him off with a look. I am not seeing a partnership, I continued. I am seeing a rescue mission, and rescue missions do not have equal terms. I checked my watch. I have another meeting in 10 minutes. I lied. Grant stared at me. His face was a mask of confusion and anger. Are you dismissing us? He asked. Incredulous. I am giving you a reality check. I said. I picked up the folder. I will review the rest of your materials. I said. But if you want to deal with Sterling and Locke, you need to understand one thing. We do not buy legacies. We buy assets. And right now, I am trying to find one worth paying for. I turned to walk out. Wait, Grant called out. I stopped at the door. I did not turn around. Yes? Who are you? He asked. His voice was different now. The bluster was gone. It was quieter, unsettled. You remind me of someone. I smiled at the door handle. I am the managing partner, I said, and then I walked out, leaving them in the glass box, high above the city, 3 men shrinking in the afternoon sun. I stopped with my hand on the cool metal of the door handle. I did not turn around immediately. I let the silence in the room stretch and warp, becoming a physical thing that pressed against the glass walls. Behind me, I heard the scrape of a chair leg against the floor, a harsh, violent sound that signaled the end of patience. Grant Perry had stood up too fast. I could hear the sudden intake of breath, the rustle of his suit fabric, the heavy, flat-footed landing of a man trying to reclaim space that had been stolen from him. Anger was doing for him what age could no longer manage. It was inflating him, pumping him full of a false, brittle vitality. He was not just a rejected businessman in that moment. He was an insulted patriarch, and in his world, that was a crime punishable by a lecture. Ms. Perry, he barked. The volume was unnecessary in the acoustically perfect room, but he was not speaking to be heard. He was speaking to dominate. I have been practicing law since before you were born. I have built a firm that has weathered recessions, wars, and cultural shifts. To dismiss us, to dismiss me, after a 20-minute meeting based on a spreadsheet? It is not just unprofessional, it is short-sighted. He paused, waiting for me to cower, waiting for the apology that he believed was his birthright. When I did not move, he continued, his voice dropping into that familiar, condescending register he reserved for waiters, junior associates, and his daughter. You think because you sit in a high-rise in San Francisco that you understand the practice of law? You are looking at numbers. You are not looking at the people. You are displaying a profound lack of respect for the institutions that paved the way for you. You are acting like a child who thinks she knows better than her elders because she learned how to use a calculator. A child. The word hung in the air, vibrating with a specific, toxic frequency. It was the key that unlocked the final door. He had not just insulted a managing partner, he had unknowingly recreated the exact dynamic of our entire relationship. He was scolding me. He was telling me I was small, so that he could feel tall. I turned around slowly. I did not spin. I pivoted with the mechanical grace of a vault door closing. I faced him. He was standing at the head of the table. His face flushed a deep, unhealthy red, his hands planted flat on the black marble as if he were bracing himself against a gale. Howard Keene was looking down at his notepad, terrified. Marion Whitman was watching me. Her eyes narrowed, her mind working furiously to bridge the gap between the familiar and the impossible. I walked back to the table. I did not sit down. I stood directly opposite him, separated by 20 feet of polished stone and 30 years of silence. Mr. Perry, I said. My voice was low. stripped of any corporate jargon, stripped of any politeness. It was just sound and truth. You came to my firm. You sent the courier. You asked for the meeting. You came here asking for our name because yours has lost its value. Grant blinked. The directness of the statement seemed to stun him. He opened his mouth to retort, to offer some blustering defense about legacy and brand equity. But I held up a hand. It was a small gesture, but it stopped him cold. You speak of respect, I continued. You speak of institutions, but you are not here because you respect Sterling and Locke. You are here because you are insolvent. You are here because you realize that the world has moved on, and you are still standing on a dock waiting for a ship that sailed 10 years ago. I took a step closer to the table. And do not speak to me about short-sightedness. I said, you looked at a spreadsheet and saw a business case. I looked at it and saw a biography. Grant frowned. His brows knit together in a knot of genuine confusion. The anger was still there, simmering, but doubt was creeping in at the edges. He squinted at me, really looking at me for the first time since he walked into the room. The afternoon sun was streaming through the glass behind me, likely casting me in silhouette. But as I stepped forward, the light hit my face. It illuminated the sharp angle of my jaw, the specific arch of my brow, the cold, gray stillness of my eyes. I saw the moment it happened. It was not a cinematic explosion. It was a collapse. It started in his eyes. The pupils contracted. The focus sharpened. He looked at my mouth, the same mouth that had hesitated before answering his questions at the dinner table. He looked at my hands, the hands that had clutched a debate trophy he had ignored. He looked at the way I held my shoulders, a posture I had developed specifically to withstand the weight of his dismissal. He saw the ghost of the 9-year-old girl in the backyard. He saw the teenager in the driveway. He saw the law student in the rental car, freezing and vowing never to return. The color drained from his face so fast it was frightening. The flush of anger vanished, replaced by a gray, waxen pallor. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, only to realize the ghost was holding a guillotine. Addison? He whispered. The name came out broken. It fractured in the middle. A question and a plea tangled together. It was the sound of a reality crumbling. He leaned heavier on the table, his arms trembling slightly. Addison? He said again, louder this time, but with less certainty. I did not smile. I did not offer him the relief of a daughter's warmth. I gave him the managing partner. Yes, I said. The word was simple. It was a period at the end of a very long sentence. Grant stared at me. His brain was trying to rewrite history in real time. He was trying to reconcile the woman in the $3,000 suit, the woman who commanded this skyscraper, with the soft girl he had written off. He was trying to understand how the person he deemed incapable of real law was now the person holding his mortgage. But how? He stammered. He looked around the room, as if looking for a camera, a prank, an explanation that made sense. You are here? You are the managing partner? I am. I said. Grant swallowed hard. I could see the Adam's apple bob in his throat. I did not know. He said weakly, I had no idea. I know. I replied. You never did. I let that sink in. I let him feel the full weight of his own ignorance. He hadn't known because he hadn't cared to look. He hadn't known because to him, I did not exist in the dimension of power. Keen was frozen. He had stopped sweating and gone completely still, like a prey animal hoping to avoid detection. He was realizing that every condescending joke, every dismissal, every time he had sided with Grant against me was now a line item on a bill that had come due. But it was Marion Whitman who reacted with the most clarity. Her expression shifted from confusion to a sudden, deep dread. She understood the implications immediately. This was not just a business rejection. This was not just a bad meeting. This was a reckoning. She looked at the file on the table, the file that contained their secrets, their failures, their hidden liabilities, and she realized that the person reading it was not a neutral party. I was a prosecutor who had been gathering evidence for a lifetime. Grant took a breath. He tried to straighten up. He tried to put the mask back on, but it didn't fit anymore. It slid off his face, revealing the frightened, aging man underneath. "Addison, look," he began. His voice took on a frantic, messy quality. He was pivoting. He was trying to find a footing on a cliff face that had turned to glass. It has been a long time. I did not know you were using your maiden name. I assumed you had married. You assumed I was someone else. I cut in. You assumed I was a charity worker, or a housewife, or anything other than your equal. No, that is not it." Grant lied, his hands waving in the air. I am proud of you. Look at this. Look at where we are. This is incredible. My own daughter, running Sterling and Locke. This changes everything." He forced a smile. It was a grotesque thing, stretched thin over panic. "We can work this out," he said, his voice gaining a desperate speed. "Now that we know, now that we are family. This deal makes even more sense. It is a legacy play. The Perry name, united again. We can structure this however you want. I am sure there was just a misunderstanding about the numbers. We can explain the reserves. We can explain the retention. It is just details. We can fix it." He took a step around the table, moving toward me. He was going to try to hug me. He was going to try to embrace the success he had mocked, simply because he needed it. He wanted to claim me now that I was a winner, now that I was useful. I did not move back. I did not flinch. I simply raised my voice, sharpening it into a blade. "Stop," I said. He stopped. He was 5 feet away. "Do not come any closer," I said. Grant froze. He looked hurt. He looked like he expected the cinematic reunion, the tearful forgiveness. "Addison, please," he said. "I am your father. I am sorry if things were difficult. I am sorry if I was hard on you. I just wanted you to be tough. And look, it worked. You are tough. You are a killer. I made you this way." The audacity of it took my breath away for a second. He was trying to take credit for my survival. He was trying to frame his cruelty as pedagogy. I looked at him with a cold, detached curiosity. "You did not make me," I said. "You ignored me. There is a difference." I walked back to the table and placed my hand on the file. "And as for your apology," I said, I looked him dead in the eye. "An apology does not rewrite a balance sheet. Mr. Perry," Grant flinched as if I had struck him. "You are sorry because you are caught." I said, "You are sorry because you need $20 million to recapitalize a firm that you drove into the ground. You are not sorry that you underestimated me. You are sorry that I am the one holding the pen." I picked up the file. "This meeting is over," I said. Grant looked at me, his eyes wide and wet. He looked old. Suddenly, undeniably old. "Addison, you cannot do this," he pleaded. "You cannot send us away. If we do not get a capital infusion, if we do not find a partner—" The sentence hung in the air, unfinished. He did not want to say the words bankruptcy or dissolution. "That is a structural problem," I said, "not a family one." I turned to Tessa, who had appeared silently in the doorway, her face a mask of professional neutrality, though I knew she was absorbing every second of this. "Tessa, please escort Mr. Perry and his partners to the elevators," I said. I looked back at the three of them one last time. "You will hear from my office in 1 week," I said. I paused, letting the silence stretch one final time. "If there is anything to hear—" Grant opened his mouth to speak, but he had no words left. The reality of the room, the view, the suit, and the stranger standing in his daughter's skin silenced him. He looked at Howard, then at Marion. They were both standing now, gathering their briefcases with the frantic haste of people evacuating a burning building. Grant looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his face, just a profound, hollow confusion. He turned slowly, his shoulders slumped, and walked toward the door. I watched them leave. I watched the door click shut behind them. I was alone in the glass box. I looked down at my hands. They were steady, perfectly steady. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The fog had cleared completely. The bay was a brilliant, hard blue. I took a deep breath. It did not feel like triumph. It did not feel like joy. It felt like gravity. I walked back to the table, picked up the phone, and dialed my internal strategy team. "Jason," I said when he answered. "Yes, Ms. Perry?" "Keep digging," I said. "I want to know everything about that insurance claim, and draft 2 versions of a proposal." "2 versions?" Jason asked. "Yes," I said. "One is a standard rejection letter, and the other?" I looked at the empty chair where my father had sat. "The other is a hostile takeover," I said. "With conditions." I hung up the phone. The silence returned. But this time, it was not empty. It was full. It was the silence of a chessboard after the first major piece has been taken. The game had not ended. It had just begun. The door to conference room 9 had barely latched shut before I was moving. I did not go back to my desk to ruminate on the expression of hollow shock on Grant Perry's face. I did not sit down to process the emotional debris of seeing my father reduced to a frightened old man. There is no time for sentimentality when a corpse is on the table. And make no mistake, Perry, Whitman, and Keene was a corpse. The only question remaining was whether we could harvest any organs before the rot set in completely. I walked straight to the internal strategy suite, the war room. Jason and Sarah were waiting. They had watched the partners leave. They saw the slump in Grant's shoulders, the frantic, sweating pace of Howard Keene. They knew the pitch had failed, but they did not know why I looked like I had just sanctioned a demolition. "I want a deep dive," I said, tossing the leather-bound folder onto the central table. Jason looked at it, then at me. "We already ran the financials." "Addison," he said, "they are insolvent. Why are we still looking at this?" "Because I am not interested in their bank accounts anymore," I said. "I am interested in their secrets." I paced the length of the room. The digital screens on the wall were still displaying the dismal graphs of the firm's decline. "I want a full malpractice history," I commanded, "and do not just look at the public docket. I want you to pull their insurer correspondence patterns. Look for premium spikes. Look for inquiries about tail coverage. Look for any settlement that was structured confidentially outside of the court system." Sarah began typing furiously. "And the partners," I added. "I want a breakdown of their compensation structure for the last 5 years. I want to know who is drawing what, and more importantly, I want to know if they have taken out any personal loans against their equity in the firm." I stopped pacing and looked at the screen displaying the mysterious line item. "And find out what that contingency reserve is," I said. $2.4 million does not just appear in a slush fund. That is a body bag. Find out who is inside it. The next 6 hours were a blur of forensic accounting and procedural suspense. The sun went down over San Francisco, turning the bay from a hard blue to a glittering grid of black and gold. But inside the war room, time was measured only in data points. We ordered dinner, but nobody ate. The air was thick with the smell of cooling coffee and the hum of servers processing terabytes of legal databases. At 8 o'clock, Jason found the first thread. "Addison," he said, his voice tight. "You were right about the reserve. It is not for market volatility." "Show me," I said. He pulled up a timeline of emails and wire transfers. "It is a hedge," he explained, "but it is not a standard deductible reserve. I found a trace on a secondary account linked to their malpractice carrier. They inquired about a claim notification window 6 months ago but never filed the formal notice." I leaned in. "Why would they not file?" I asked. "That is what insurance is for." "Because of the premium," Jason said. "Their loss run history is already shaky. If they report a claim of this magnitude, their carrier will likely drop them or triple their premium. They cannot afford either. So, they are trying to settle it out of pocket. They are trying to pay off a malpractice claim with operating cash to keep it off the books." I translated. "That is incredibly dangerous. If the settlement falls through, they have no coverage and no cash. I need a name. I said, "Who is the client?" Sarah raised her hand. "I think I have it," she said. She projected a news clipping onto the wall. It was a minor story from a trade journal in the manufacturing sector. Doyle Industries loses patent dispute. Due to filing error, Doyle Industries. Sarah said, they were a legacy client of Perry Whitman for 30 years. They moved their business to a Chicago firm 4 months ago. The timeline matches the reserve transfer. I looked at the headline. A filing error. That is the cardinal sin of litigation. It is not a judgment call. It is a clerical failure. It means someone missed a deadline. I picked up my phone. I knew the general counsel at Doyle Industries. We had sat on a panel together in New York 2 years ago. It was late, but in our world, nobody sleeps before midnight. I stepped into the hallway and made the call. It was a discreet conversation, phrased in the hypothetical language of the legal elite, but the confirmation was absolute. Perry, Whitman and Keene had missed a statute of limitations on a patent filing. It cost Doyle Industries $3 million. Grant Perry had personally promised to make them whole to avoid a lawsuit that would destroy the firm's reputation. The $2.4 million was not a reserve. It was a settlement offer that Doyle hadn't accepted yet. I walked back into the room. It is Doyle Industries, I said, and it gets worse. Grant is trying to pay them off, but he is short. That is why he is here. He needs our capital to pay for his mistake so he can keep playing the great statesman. But where did they get the cash they do have? Jason asked. If revenue is down, where did $2 million come from? That was the second shoe to drop. At 9:30, Sarah found the loan document. It was buried in a subdirectory of their corporate filings, labeled simply as Operational Financing Agreement. But when we opened the PDF, the header was unmistakable. Litigation Capital Management, LLC. I felt a chill go down my spine. They took out a loan. Sarah whispered, but it is not a bank loan. It is litigation finance. I read the terms. It was a non-recourse loan secured by their future fee revenue. The interest rate was predatory, 28% annually. Compounding, and there was a covenant. If the firm failed to meet certain revenue targets, the lenders gained the right to veto settlement decisions on major cases. They sold their autonomy. I said, my voice quiet. This is not a law firm anymore. It is a debt vehicle. This was the private funding agreement tied to future revenue. It was legal, but it was the kind of desperate, high-risk maneuver that you only see in firms that are circling the drain. Grant had mortgaged the future of every associate in that building to keep the lights on for another year. Then came the internal communications. We cracked their server logs. Legally, of course. Using the due diligence access key they had foolishly provided in the initial packet. The emails painted a portrait of a kingdom at war with itself. I saw the correspondence between the partners. Marion Whitman was the realist. Her emails were short, panicked, and pragmatic. We need to sell. She wrote to Grant 2 weeks ago, we cannot make payroll in May. We have to find a buyer who will take the liabilities. Howard Keene was the politician. He was obsessed with optics. We cannot let the country club know. He wrote, if word gets out, we are shopping the firm. The sharks will smell blood. We need to frame it as a strategic expansion. And Grant was the delusional monarch. I will not sell my name, he wrote in reply to Marion. We are Perry, Whitman and Keene. We do not merge. We acquire. I will find a partner who understands the value of our legacy. We just need a bridge loan. He wanted control. He was willing to burn the entire building down as long as he could sit in the master's chair while it turned to ash. I sat back in my chair, rubbing my temples. The picture was complete. It was a tragedy of ego. And then, my personal email pinged. It was not my work address. It was the private Gmail account I had not used for anything other than online shopping and spam for a decade. The sender was dperry_law. My breath caught in my throat. I opened the message. Subject: I did not know. Addison: I am writing this from my car in the parking garage. Dad just called me. He told me what happened. He told me you are the managing partner. I need you to know something. I did not know it would land on your desk. I swear to God. When I pushed Dad to send the application to Sterling and Locke, I just picked the biggest firm on the West Coast. I saw the revenue numbers and I thought, maybe they are big enough to absorb us. I pushed the application through because the firm is sinking. Addison. Faster than Dad will admit. We missed payroll for the support staff last month. I paid the paralegals out of my own savings account so they wouldn't quit. Dad doesn't know. He thinks the money appeared by magic. The associates are scared. They have mortgages. They have kids. If the firm goes under, they get nothing. Dad is obsessed with his legacy. But I am just trying to keep people from losing their homes. I am sorry. I am sorry for everything. For how we were. For how he was. I know you owe us nothing. But if there is any way you can save the people here, even if you burn the partners, please do it. Dylan. I stared at the screen. The letters blurred slightly. Dylan, the golden boy, the chosen one. He was not a titan. He was just a terrified middle manager trying to pay the paralegals from his own pocket. He wasn't the villain of the story. He was just another victim of Grant Perry's hubris. I looked up at the wall. I looked at the list of associates. The ones who hadn't left yet. The ones who were trapped. I realized then what the real tragedy was. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about Grant. It was about the 40 people working in that street. Lewis' office who were going to wake up one morning to find the doors locked because 3 old men were too proud to admit they had failed. These associates were trapped under senior egos and hidden liabilities. They were working 80-hour weeks for a firm that had already spent their bonuses on interest payments to a predatory lender. I stood up. The cold, vindictive pleasure I had felt in the conference room was gone. It was replaced by a steely surgical resolve. I am not going to let them drown. I whispered. Jason looked up. What was that? Clear the room. I said. What? Go home. I said. You have done your job. I have the data I need. But what are we going to do? Sarah asked. Do we send the rejection letter? No. I said. I sat down at the head of the table. I pulled my laptop toward me. The screen glowed in the dim room. I am going to draft a counteroffer. I said. Jason and Sarah exchanged a look, then gathered their things. They knew better than to argue with me when I had that look in my eye. When the door clicked shut, I was alone. I opened a blank document. I thought about Grant's face. You want to own us. I thought about Dylan's email. Please save the people. I thought about the $2.4 million lie and the 28% interest rate. I began to type. This would not be a standard acquisition. A standard acquisition implies a willing seller and a fair price. This was a rescue operation performed on a patient who was fighting the doctors. I outlined the terms. They were brutal. They were fair. They were absolute. We would not buy the firm. We would buy the assets. We would strip the toxicity out of the structure. We would pay off the litigation loan. But the cost would come out of the partner's equity. Grant would not be the chairman. He would be a figurehead with no voting power. Keene would be removed from management entirely. And Dylan. Dylan would finally get a chance to be a lawyer instead of a prop. I reached the final section of the executive summary. This was the thesis statement. The sentence that would define the rest of their lives. I typed it out slowly, saying the words aloud as my fingers hit the keys. This will not be a partnership. This will be a takeover with conditions. I hit save. It was 3 a.m. The city outside was asleep, but I was wide awake. I printed the document. It was 10 pages of dense, undeniable leverage. I put it in a fresh envelope. Grant Perry wanted a legacy? I was about to give him one. It just wasn't the one he wrote for himself. The document on my screen was not a peace treaty. It was a cage. For the next 4 hours. I worked in the absolute silence of the 44th floor, crafting a legal instrument that would dismantle my father's ego while saving the livelihoods of the 40 people he had imperiled. I did not write with anger. Anger is sloppy. Anger leaves loopholes. I wrote with the cold, sterile precision of a surgeon removing a tumor that had wrapped itself around a vital artery. This was not going to be a partnership. A partnership implies a meeting of equals, a sharing of risk and reward. There was no equality here. There was only a rescuer and the drowning. I deleted every instance of the word merger from the template and replaced it with asset acquisition. The distinction was critical. In a merger, you marry the other firm, you take on their debts, their bad habits, and their history. In an asset acquisition, you walk into their house and point at the things you want to keep. You take the furniture, the silverware, and the paintings, and you leave the rot in the walls for the landlord to deal with. I structured the deal to buy 3 specific things. First, the client contracts, but not all of them. I included a schedule of transferability. We would take the institutional clients, the manufacturing hubs, and the legacy family estates that generated consistent billable hours. We would not take the dead weight, the friends of Grant who hadn't paid a bill in 6 months, or the vanity cases that Howard Keene kept open to feel important. Second, the talent. This was the non-negotiable core of the deal. The agreement stipulated that Sterling and Locke was acquiring the employment contracts of all associates and paralegals currently on the payroll. I drafted a clause that guaranteed their tenure for 18 months, effectively shielding them from the inevitable layoffs that usually follow a takeover. Third, the brand name. This was the bait. I knew Grant would never sign a document that erased Perry, Whitman, and Keene from the world. He needed to see his name on the door to breathe. So I gave him that, but I hollowed it out. The St. Louis office would be rebranded as the Perry Whitman Legal Group. It sounded prestigious. It sounded independent, but the fine print defined it as a wholly owned affiliate of Sterling and Locke Global. They could keep the sign on the building, but I would own the building. Then came the governance protocols. I created a new management structure. The affiliate would be governed by an oversight committee appointed by the parent company. That meant me. I would determine the budget. I would approve the hires. I would set the billing rates. Grant Perry would retain the title of founding chairman, but I stripped the role of any executive authority. He could not hire. He could not fire. He could not sign checks over $5,000 without countersignature from San Francisco. It was a ceremonial role. I was turning him into the Queen of England. Plenty of pomp, zero power. Next, I addressed the money. This was where the revenge stopped being abstract and became mathematical. Standard acquisitions often include golden parachutes for the senior partners, massive payouts to incentivize them to leave quietly. I deleted that section entirely. There would be no golden parachute for bad planning. I was not going to pay Grant and his cronies a premium for driving their own firm into the ground. Instead, I instituted a performance-based earn-out. The senior partners would receive a modest base salary, roughly 40% of what they were currently drawing. The rest of their compensation would be tied to a strict formula based on client retention. If the clients stayed for 2 years, the partners got paid. If the clients left, the partners got nothing. I was forcing them to work for their exit. I was making them earn the salvation I was providing. Then I turned my attention to the skeletons in the closet. I drafted a section titled Mandatory Disclosure of Contingent Liabilities. This was the Doyle Industries Clause. I wrote it in plain English, devoid of the usual legal obfuscation. It stated that before any signature could be affixed to the document, Perry, Whitman, and Keene had to provide a full written disclosure of all pending insurance claims, including the patent error they were trying to hide. I added a penalty clause. If they failed to disclose any liability that was later discovered, the deal would retroactively void their earn-out packages, and Sterling and Locke would have the right to claw back any funds already paid. I was not going to let them say we will explain later. They would explain now, in writing, under penalty of perjury. Then I dealt with Howard Keene. My data analysis had shown that Keene was a liability. His client retention numbers were abysmal, and his charm was largely responsible for the exodus of modern corporate clients who found his style antiquated and offensive. I wrote a specific covenant regarding client transition. Howard Keene shall be restricted from any direct role in the renegotiation of client retainers during the transition period. It was humiliating, and it was necessary. I could not let the man who broke the relationships be the one to try and fix them. He would be allowed to attend cocktail parties and shake hands, but he would not be allowed to touch the contracts. Finally, I added the Associate Protection Protocol. This was for Dylan. This was for the 12 lawyers who had left, and the 40 who were still trapped. I mandated an immediate 20% salary adjustment for all associates to bring them in line with market rates. I instituted a formal mentorship program that bypassed the senior partners entirely, connecting the St. Louis associates directly with senior litigators in my San Francisco office. And I created an accelerated promotion track. High performers would be eligible for junior partnership in the affiliate entity within 24 months, regardless of their last name. I was dismantling the glass ceiling that Grant had built and replacing it with a ladder. I sat back and reviewed the document. It was 18 pages long. It was brutal. It was fair. It was the only way they survived. But I needed a lever. I needed a weapon to force Grant to sign this surrender. He was a proud man. He would read this and see it as an insult. He would rather burn the firm down than hand me the keys to his kingdom. So I wrote the final section, the alternative disposition option. It was a single paragraph at the end of the agreement. It stated that this offer was valid for 48 hours. If the offer was rejected, or if the disclosure schedules were found to be incomplete, Sterling and Locke reserved the right to withdraw the acquisition offer and immediately initiate a direct hiring strategy. In plain terms, if you do not sign this deal, I will simply hire every single one of your talented lawyers individually. I will offer them the retention packages directly. I will call your clients and offer them a seamless transfer to my firm. I will take the people and the business, and I will leave you with the empty desks, the lease, and the debt. It was the nuclear option. I was giving him a choice between becoming a diminished king in a saved kingdom, or a lonely man in a graveyard. I saved the file as structural_rescue_proposal_PWK. It was Saturday morning by the time I finished. The sun was rising, painting the fog outside my window in shades of lavender and gray. The city was quiet. I told Tessa to set up the meeting for 10 o'clock that morning. I gave her specific instructions: no support staff, no Howard Keene, no Marion Whitman, just Grant. I wanted him alone. I did not want him to have an audience to perform for. When men like Grant Perry have an audience, they act out of pride. When they are alone, they act out of fear. And I needed him to be afraid enough to be rational. I went to the gym in the building's basement. I ran 5 miles on the treadmill, watching the numbers climb, burning off the adrenaline of the night. I showered and changed into a fresh suit, navy blue, sharp, authoritative. At 9:55, I walked to the elevator bank. I told security to let him up. I stood in the reception area. It was a vast, open space of white marble and abstract art. On a Saturday, it was tomb-like. The silence was absolute. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Grant Perry stepped out. He looked different than he had on Tuesday. On Tuesday, he had worn a suit that was trying to be expensive. Today, he wore a blazer and slacks, the uniform of a man going to a country club lunch. But his face betrayed him. He looked tired. The skin under his eyes was bruised with exhaustion. He held a briefcase, but he held it like a shield, not a weapon. He saw me standing there. He stopped. There were no receptionists to greet him, no associates to fetch him coffee, no Howard to laugh at his jokes, just me. "Hello, Grant," I said. I did not call him Dad. I did not call him Mr. Perry. I used his first name. It was a breach of the hierarchy he had raised me in, a subtle signal that the ground had shifted. "Addison," he said. His voice echoed in the empty lobby. "Thank you for coming," I said. I turned and walked toward my office. I did not wait to see if he followed. I knew he would. He had nowhere else to go. We walked down the long corridor of glass offices. I could feel him looking at the names on the doors, the awards on the walls, the sheer scale of the operation I commanded. Every step was a reminder of what I had built without him. I opened the door to my office. It was not the conference room. It was my personal sanctuary. It was intimate, but it was an intimacy of power. My desk was a fortress. The chairs in front of it were lower than mine. "Please, sit," I said. Grant sat. He placed his briefcase on his lap. He looked around the room, his eyes landing on a framed photo on my bookshelf. It was not a family photo. It was a picture of me shaking hands with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He swallowed. I have a proposal. I said. I did not slide the document across the desk yet. I wanted him to listen before he read. I know about the loan. Grant, I said softly. He stiffened. I know about the 28% interest rate. I know about the missed payroll. And I know about the Doyle Industries claim you are trying to hide. Grant's face went gray. He opened his mouth. But I cut him off. Do not lie to me. I said, the time for stories is over. You are insolvent. You have weeks, maybe days, before the lenders call that loan and seize your receivables. When that happens, the firm dies. The associates lose their jobs, the clients sue you for malpractice, and your legacy becomes a cautionary tale about hubris. Grant looked down at his hands. They were trembling. I can fix it, he whispered. I just need time. You do not have time, I said, and you cannot fix it. You broke it. I picked up the document. I can fix it, I said. I slid the proposal across the desk. This is a counteroffer. I said, it is not a partnership. It is a takeover. Grant looked at the thick stack of paper. He made no move to touch it. I am offering to buy the assets of the firm. I explained, I will pay off the litigation loan. I will settle the Doyle claim. I will guarantee the jobs of every single employee in your office for 18 months. Grant looked up. Hope flickered in his eyes. You will save the firm? He asked. I will save the people, I corrected, and I will save the name. But there are conditions. I laid them out. I told him about the loss of executive power. I told him about the earnout. I told him about Keene's restriction. He listened in silence. As I spoke, I could see him shrinking. I was stripping away the illusions he had wrapped himself in, and finally, I said, there is one more thing. I pointed to the final page. If you do not sign this today, I said, I will withdraw the offer. On Monday morning, my head of talent acquisition will call Dylan and every other associate on your list. I will offer them jobs here, or in our Chicago office, or remotely. I will pay them double what you are paying them. They will leave. Grant, you know they will. I leaned forward. And I will call your top 5 clients and tell them that Perry Whitman is about to default on a high-risk loan. They will move their business to me by noon. Grant stared at me. He looked horrified. You would do that? He asked. You would destroy me? I am not destroying you. I said, I am giving you a choice. I tapped the document. Option A. You sign this. You keep your office. You keep your title. You keep your dignity. The firm survives as a Sterling and Locke affiliate. You get to retire as a chairman. Not a failure. I paused. Option B. You walk out of here. You keep your pride. And in 1 month, you are the captain of a ship with no crew, sinking in the middle of the ocean. I sat back. I know exactly what I'm offering you. Grant, it is salvation, but it is not comfort. The room was silent. The only sound was the distant hum of the building's ventilation. Grant looked at the document. He looked at me. He looked at the photo of the Chief Justice. He reached out a shaking hand and opened the cover page. He began to read. I watched him. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I just waited. I had built the walls, locked the doors, and left him with only one key. Now, I just had to wait for him to turn it. Grant arrived at my office door at 10 o'clock sharp. Though I knew he had been in the lobby since 9:30, he walked in wearing a double-breasted suit that belonged to a different era, a different economy, and a different version of himself. He had squared his shoulders and lifted his chin, wearing confidence like an old garment that had been taken out of storage. It was high quality, but it smelled of mothballs and did not quite fit the man he had become. I did not guide him to the conference room. The conference room was for negotiations between armies. It was for theater. This meeting did not require theater. It required the truth, and the truth is best served in a quiet room with the door closed. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. Please, I said. Grant sat down. He looked around the office. It was a space designed for focus. The walls were lined with books on securities regulation and international trade. The view behind me was not just a view, it was a statement of altitude. We were above the fog line. He placed his hands on his knees, squeezing the fabric of his trousers. "Addison," he started, his voice attempting a jovial, paternal tone. "I appreciate the personal meeting. The other day, well, tensions were high. It is good to sit down, just the two of us, family to family." I did not smile. I did not indulge the fantasy that we were just two lawyers catching up. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the document I had spent the night constructing. I placed it in the center of the mahogany. Halfway between us, it sat there, thick and white, bound with a single staple. I slid it across to him. "Read it," I said. Grant looked at the document. He looked at me. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the paper as if it might burn him. Then, he picked it up. I watched his face. I had learned to read juries by watching the micro-expressions that flickered across their features when they thought no one was looking. Watching Grant read the terms of his own surrender was a masterclass in human emotion. First, there was confusion. He read the title, Asset Acquisition and Restructuring Agreement. His brow furrowed. He was looking for the word partnership. He was looking for merger. He flipped the page, his eyes scanning the definitions section. Then came the alarm. It started in his jaw. The muscles tightened as he read the clause about the governance structure. He saw that the Perry Whitman Legal Group would be a wholly owned subsidiary. He saw the oversight committee. He realized he would not be appointing the members. He flipped another page. He reached the section on compensation. The grief hit him then. It was a physical sagging of his face. He saw the numbers. He saw that there was no payout, no 8-figure check to fund a retirement in Palm Springs. There was only an earnout based on performance. He was reading the mathematical proof that his firm had zero equity value. Then came the anger. He looked up, his eyes snapping to mine. The color rose in his neck. "You want to own us," he said. It was an accusation, sharp and bitter. I did not flinch. I kept my hands folded on the desk. "I want to stop the bleeding," I replied. He slammed the document down. It was not a thunderous noise, just a dull slap against the wood. "This is not a partnership," he hissed. "This is a colonization. You are stripping us for parts. You are taking the clients, the staff, the name, and you are leaving me with what? A title? A salary allowance? I am leaving you with a firm that still exists." I said, calm but firm. "You are humiliating me." He said, "Is that what this is? Is this about the dinner? Is this about the internship?" He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine for the hurt child he remembered. "Is this revenge, Addison?" he asked. "Because if it is petty. You are using your checkbook to settle a family score." I looked at him. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, heavy clarity. "Revenge would be letting you drown slowly," I answered. The words hung in the air between us. "If I wanted revenge, Grant," I continued, "I would have done nothing. I would have sent you a polite rejection letter on Tuesday. I would have waited 6 weeks for the lenders to foreclose on your receivables. I would have waited for the malpractice suit from Doyle Industries to hit the public docket. I would have watched from this window while you filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy and explained to the Bar Association why you were operating while insolvent." Grant flinched. The mention of Doyle Industries took the wind out of his sails. I leaned forward. "That would have been revenge," I said. "Watching you lose everything you built because you were too arrogant to ask for help until it was too late. That would have been satisfying in a cruel way." I tapped the document. "This," I said, "this is a rescue." Grant slumped back in his chair. He looked at the papers again, but the fire was gone. He was calculating now. He was looking for the wiggle room. He was looking for the loophole that I had already closed. "The oversight clause," he said, pointing to page 4. "It gives you veto power over all hiring decisions." "Yes," I said. "That is unacceptable," he said, trying to regain his footing. "I built this team. I know the market in St. Louis. I need to be able to staff my own cases. You built a team that has a 14% retention rate, I countered. You built a team where the junior associates are leaving for public defender jobs to escape the culture. You have lost the right to staff the cases. Grant, you are not good at it. He bristled. I have an eye for talent, he insisted. You have an eye for sycophants. I said, you hire people who look like you and agree with you, and when they realize there is no future because you refuse to share equity, they leave. I pointed to the clause. My oversight ensures that the people we hire stay. It ensures that the people currently there get paid market rates. It protects the asset. He flipped to the next section, and this transition restriction on Howard. He said, you are sidelining a senior partner. Howard is the face of the firm. Howard is the reason you lost the Kensington account. I said. Grant stopped. You did not know that, did you? I asked. Howard told you they left because of a conflict of interest. They didn't. They left because Howard missed a filing deadline and tried to laugh it off at a golf outing. They fired you because he was incompetent. Grant looked down. He hadn't known. Of course he hadn't known. He lived in a bubble where Howard was his best friend and everyone loved them. I cannot treat a partner like that. Grant said weakly, it is disrespectful. It is business. I said, Howard can stay. He can have an office. He can have a title. But he does not touch the client transition. If he does, the deal is void. Grant ran a hand over his face. He looked exhausted. He was running out of cards to play. Addison, please, he said. Can we not structure this as a merger of equals? Just on paper? For the press release? We can keep the terms private, but publicly, I need to look like I am still in charge. I need to retain veto power on the board. He was begging for the throne. He did not care about the kingdom anymore. He just wanted to keep the crown. No, I said. Why? He pleaded. What difference does it make to you? You get the money. You get the control. Why can you not let me have the dignity of a veto? Because you will use it, I said. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city, then turned back to face him. If I give you veto power, you will use it to block the changes that need to save the firm, I said. You will block the technology upgrades because they are too expensive. You will block the associate raises because you think they are spoiled. You will block the rebranding because you are sentimental. I walked back to the desk and looked down at him. You did not plan for succession. Grant, you did not modernize. You treated the firm like your personal fiefdom, and now, your associates, people with families, people like Dylan, are going to pay for your denial unless I intervene. Grant looked away. He could not meet my gaze. I am not going to give you a weapon to sink the ship again. I said. Grant was silent for a long time. He stared at the carpet. I cannot sign this, he whispered. I felt a flash of irritation, but I pushed it down. Why? I asked. Because it says I failed, he said. His voice cracked. If I sign this, everyone will know. The Bar Association, the club, my friends, they will know that Grant Perry sold out to his daughter because he couldn't make payroll. He looked up at me, and his eyes were wet. I will be a joke. Addison, I will be the man who couldn't hold it together. This was it, the core of the infection. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about the law. It was about the terrifying, fragile ego of a man who defined his existence by his professional stature. I sat back down. I lowered my voice. I spoke to him not as a lawyer, but as the person who knew him better than he knew himself. Grant, I said. He looked at me. You have two choices. I said. I held up one finger. Choice one. You refuse to sign. You walk out of here with your pride intact for exactly 3 weeks. Then the loan comes due. You default. The firm collapses. You lay off 40 people. Dylan loses his job. The Doyle lawsuit goes public. And your reputation is destroyed forever. You will be remembered as the man who burned down a 100-year-old institution because he was too proud to take a life raft. I held up a second finger. Choice 2. You sign this. You announce a strategic partnership with Sterling and Locke. You spin it as an evolution. You stay on as chairman. You keep your office. You keep your standing in the community. The check's clear. The associates get raises. The clients stay. I leaned in closer. You can keep being important, or you can keep your people employed. I said, pick one. Grant stared at me. The reality of the ultimatum crashed into him. He realized that his pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He realized that the importance he clung to was a hologram. His mask cracked. The confident patriarch dissolved. The blustering lawyer vanished. All that was left was a frightened old man who didn't want to be forgotten. I am scared, Addison, he admitted. The words were barely audible. I know. I said, I am scared that if I am not running the firm, then who am I? I looked at him with a strange kind of pity. It wasn't warm, but it was understanding. He was a tragedy of his own making, but he was still a human being. You are the founder, I said. I reached across the desk and tapped the signature line on the last page. Sign this, and you get to be the man who secured the future. You get to be the man who put his people first. I softened my voice, offering the only piece of grace I would allow in this room. Sign this, Grant, and your legacy becomes bigger than your ego. He looked at the pen lying next to the document. He looked at his hands. He looked at the future that was rushing toward him, indifferent to his desires. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, a tremor of age and adrenaline. He looked at me one last time. There was no anger left, just a profound, quiet defeat that looked, strangely, like relief. You are a real lawyer, Addison, he said softly. I did not smile. I did not need his validation anymore. I know, I said. He looked down at the paper. He took a breath that sounded like a rattle in his chest, and then he signed his name. Grant signed the papers on Saturday morning. But a signature is just ink until the money moves, and money does not move on the weekend. That 48-hour window of banking paralysis is the most dangerous time in any acquisition. It is the breath between the lightning and the thunder, the silence where doubts fester, and, in the case of desperate men, where sabotage begins. I expected Grant to struggle with the psychological weight of the surrender. I expected him to drink too much scotch and stare at his office walls. But I made a calculation error regarding Howard Keene. I assumed Keene was merely incompetent. I forgot that incompetence is often shielded by a survival instinct that is as vicious as it is short-sighted. By Sunday afternoon, the tremor hit my desk in San Francisco. It started with a call from the general counsel of Vanguard Motors, a massive logistics client that had been with Perry, Whitman and Keene for 20 years. They were the jewel in the crown of the saint, Lewis portfolio, billing nearly $1.5 million annually. Addison, the general counsel said. His voice clipped and cold. We are putting a hold on the file transfer. I sat up straighter. The transfer wasn't supposed to happen until Tuesday. Is there a problem with the compliance protocols? I asked, keeping my voice level. No, he said. The problem is that I just got off the phone with Howard Keene. He tells me that Sterling and Locke is planning to liquidate the litigation division of the St. Louis office. He says you are buying the firm to strip the assets and shut down the local presence within 6 months. My hand tightened on the phone. It was a lie, a bold, clumsy, terrifying lie. He told me, the general counsel continued, that he has a rescue plan with a local boutique firm that will keep the team intact. He is asking us to sign an intent letter to move our business to this new entity. I closed my eyes for a second. Keene was scorching the earth. He knew the deal I had forced Grant to sign restricted his role. He knew he was finished. So, he had decided that if he couldn't captain the ship, he would torpedo it and try to paddle away on a piece of driftwood, taking the most valuable cargo with him. It is a classic panic move. Men who confuse control with leadership often destroy the very thing they claim to be saving just to prove they still have hands on the wheel. I appreciate you telling me this. I said, Howard is mistaken. In fact, he is currently in breach of his fiduciary duty. I am going to send you a document in 5 minutes. It is the associate retention schedule I signed yesterday. It guarantees the jobs of the entire litigation team for 18 months. We are not stripping the office. We are fortifying it. There was a pause on the line. 18 months? He asked. Howard said you were firing everyone. Howard is lying to save his own skin. I said, read the document. If you still want to leave on Tuesday, I will facilitate the transfer myself. But do not make a decision based on the panic of a man who is about to lose his parking spot. I hung up and immediately dialed St. Louis. I did not call Grant. Grant was likely at home, wallowing in his new reality. I did not call Keene. You do not warn the arsonist that you are bringing the fire hose. I called Marion Whitman, and I looped in Dylan. They answered on a conference line. I could hear the background noise of the office, even on a Sunday. The associates were there, sensing the doom hanging over the building. We have a problem. I said, Howard Keene is torching the deal. He is calling clients and telling them I am an asset stripper. He is trying to line up a competing offer to block the acquisition. There was a stunned silence. He is doing what? Dylan asked. His voice sounded young, incredulous. He is trying to trigger a vote. I said, the partnership agreement requires a unanimous vote for a sale of assets. Grant signed, and I assumed he spoke for the board. But if Howard rallies a dissent, he can stall the closing. He is calling a partner meeting for tomorrow morning, Marion said, her voice sharp. She was catching up fast. He sent out a memo an hour ago. He claims he has found a white knight, a local firm that wants to merge. There is no white knight. I said, there is just Howard trying to leverage the client list to get himself a better severance package. If he succeeds, the deal with me dies. The loan gets called. The firm goes bankrupt, and he walks away with the 3 clients he managed to steal. I need you to stop him. I said, how? Dylan asked. He is a named partner. I am just an associate. You are the future. I said, and you are the only one with clean hands. I sent a file to their secure emails. I just forwarded you the finalized associate protection protocol and the repayment schedule for the litigation loan. I said, print it out. Make 40 copies. You want us to distribute this? Marion asked. Before the deal closes? I want you to flood the office with it. I said, I want every paralegal, every secretary, and every junior associate to see exactly what I'm offering. I want them to see the 20% raises. I want them to see the 18-month job guarantees. And I want them to see that I am paying off the debt that threatens their pensions. Then, I added, the steel entering my voice, I want you to go into that partner meeting tomorrow and eviscerate him. Monday morning arrived with the heavy, gray humidity of the Midwest. I was in San Francisco, monitoring the situation via a video link that Dylan had set up on his laptop in the conference room. I was a silent observer, a ghost in the machine. The 3 partners sat at the table. Grant looked like a man walking to the gallows. Marion was stone-faced. Howard Keene was vibrating with manic energy. Gentlemen, Marion, Keene started, clapping his hands together. I have called this emergency meeting because we have a lifeline. I have spoken to the managing partner at Davis & Lowry. They are willing to take us on. We keep our independence. We keep our structure. We don't have to sell out to corporate raiders. He glanced at Grant, appealing to his vanity. Grant, we don't have to let your daughter dismantle your legacy. We can stay local. We can stay us. All we have to do is vote no on the Sterling and Locke proposal. Grant looked up, his eyes weary. Howard, the Davis firm is a bankruptcy mill. Grant said, they don't do complex litigation. They have cash, Howard insisted, and they respect us. They won't put us under an oversight committee. They won't humiliate us. He was gaining steam. He was selling the dream of the status quo, the most intoxicating drug for old men. That is when I triggered the contingency. I texted Dylan. Now. The door to the conference room opened. It wasn't a partner. It was Dylan Perry. He walked in, not with the deference of a son, but with the stride of a prosecutor. He was holding a stack of papers. Dylan? Grant asked. Confused. This is a partner meeting. You need to see this, Dylan said. He slammed the papers down in front of Grant. What is this? Howard demanded. Get out. Dylan, it is a call log, Dylan said. His voice was steady. It shook slightly, but he held the line. It is a log of calls made from your office extension yesterday. Howard, to Vanguard, to Doyle, To the Manufacturing Alliance. Dylan looked at his father. He is soliciting them. Dad. He is telling them lies about the Sterling and Locke deal to get them to leave. He is poisoning the client well so that he has something to trade when he jumps ship to Davis and Lowry. That is a lie, Howard shouted. Standing up, I am protecting this firm. You are protecting yourself, Dylan shouted back. He turned to the window, where the bullpen of associates could be seen. I just showed the entire staff the Sterling and Locke offer, Dylan said. Every single person out there knows that Addison is offering raises and job security. They know she is paying off the loan. He pointed a finger at Howard. If you vote no, Howard, you are not just killing the deal. You are firing 40 people who finally have a lifeline. Howard sneered. They are associates. They do what they are told. And without the partners, they are nothing. I unmuted my microphone. My voice filled the room, coming from the laptop speaker like the voice of God. That is where you are wrong. Howard. Keene jumped. He spun around to look at the screen. Addison? He sputtered. If you vote no, I said, my voice calm and deadly, I will trigger the alternative disposition option. I paused to let the legal terms sink in. I will withdraw the acquisition offer immediately, and at 12:01, I will open a direct hiring portal for every associate on your staff. I will offer them the exact same package I put in the deal. The raises, the bonuses, the relocation options. I looked directly at Keene through the camera lens. They know the terms now. Howard. Dylan made sure of that. If you block this deal, they will walk out the door by noon. I will hire your talent. I will call Vanguard and tell them the truth about your solicitation. I will take the people, the clients, and the revenue. I leaned into the camera. And you, Howard, will be left with an empty lease, a defaulted loan, and a lawsuit for tortious interference that I will prosecute personally. The room was silent. The threat was perfectly legal and devastatingly clean. I was removing his leverage by proving that the value of the firm was not in the partners, but in the people he treated like furniture. Grant looked at the call logs Dylan had thrown on the table. He looked at the frantic, sweaty face of his best friend. You called Vanguard? Grant asked quietly. Behind my back? I was trying to save us, Howard pleaded. You were trying to steal them, Grant said. Grant stood up. He looked at me on the screen. He looked at his son, who was standing tall, defending the people instead of the power. I vote yes, Grant said. Marion? I asked. Yes, Marion said immediately. Grant turned to Howard. You are done. Howard, resign. Now, or we vote you out for cause. Howard Keene looked around the room. He saw no allies. He saw only the wreckage of his own ambition. He realized that the charm had finally run out. He grabbed his briefcase. He was shaking with rage. Fine, he spat. Take it. Take the scraps. He walked to the door, but he stopped. He couldn't leave without throwing one last grenade. He couldn't lose without trying to make sure no one else won. He looked at Grant. You think she is saving you? Howard laughed. A bitter, jagged sound. She hates you. Grant, she is not doing this for the business. She is doing this to humiliate you. She wants you to be her employee. She wants you to bow down to the daughter you threw away. She is doing this to punish you forever. He slammed the door. The silence that followed was suffocating. Grant stared at the closed door. The words had landed. I could see them sinking into his skin. She hates you. She wants to punish you. Dylan looked at me on the screen. He looked worried. The deal is approved, Grant said. His voice was hollow. We will sign the closing docs. He walked out of the room without looking at anyone. That night, at 11:30, my phone rang. It was Grant. I picked it up. I was sitting on my balcony, watching the lights of the Bay Bridge. Hello, Grant? I said. Is it true? He asked. His voice was raw. It sounded like he had been crying, or drinking, or both. Is what true? What Howard said? Grant rasped. Is this just punishment? Did you construct this whole thing? The oversight? The stripping of my power? Just to humiliate me? Do you hate me that much? I closed my eyes. I took a sip of the cold air. This was the moment. I could lie and say it was just business. I could tell him I loved him, but neither would be true. No, Grant, I said, it is not true. I do not hate you. I listened to his breathing on the other end. And I am not trying to humiliate you. I continued. I saved your name. I saved your home. I saved your son's career. But the conditions, he whispered, they are so hard. I gripped the railing of the balcony. They are necessary. I said, I hesitated, then delivered the truth that had been waiting for 30 years. You spent your whole life avoiding the consequences of your choices. Dad, you ignored me because it was easier than dealing with a daughter who didn't fit your mold. You ignored the market because it was easier than changing. You ignored the debt because it was easier than admitting you were failing. I looked out at the vast, dark ocean. Howard calls it humiliation. I said, I paused, but that is just because you have never felt it before. What? He asked. Accountability. I said, you will finally learn what accountability feels like. It feels heavy. Grant, it feels like rules you cannot break. It feels like having to earn your place every single day. I let out a long breath. I am not punishing you. I am teaching you the one thing you never taught me. What is that? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. That actions have a cost. I said, and now we are finally square. I hung up the phone. The deal was closed. The firm was mine. The war was over. But as I sat there in the dark, I knew that the hardest part, the rebuilding, was just beginning. Tuesday morning arrived with a sky that looked like polished steel. It was the kind of day that felt manufactured for consequence, crisp and unyielding. The closing was scheduled for 9 o'clock in the main conference room of Sterling and Locke. The table was set. The paralegals had arranged the signature packets in neat, intimidating stacks, each one flagged with yellow tabs, indicating where an 80-year legacy was about to be signed over to new management. Grant Perry sat at the center of the table. He was wearing his best suit, a charcoal three-piece that he usually reserved for Supreme Court arguments or funerals. Today, it felt appropriate for both. Next to him sat Marion Whitman, looking tired but resolved. Dylan was there too, sitting not at the kids' table, but at the right hand of the transition team. I stood at the head of the room. I did not sit. I watched the scene with the detached focus of a pilot landing a plane in a crosswind. The press statement was already drafted and sitting in my draft folder, waiting for a single click. The wire transfer of $18 million, enough to clear the predatory loan and fund the escrow for the Doyle settlement, was queued in the bank portal. The whole thing, the entire rescue operation, was balanced on the tip of a fountain pen. Grant picked up the pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black. He held it over the signature line of the asset purchase agreement, and then he stopped. The room went silent. You could hear the hum of the hard drives in the server room down the hall. Grant looked down at the paper, but I knew he was not reading the words. He was looking at the name, Perry. Whitman and Keene typed in bold letters at the top of the page. He was looking at the history he had inherited and the identity he had constructed around it. For 5 decades, he had been the founder, the patriarch, the unquestioned authority. He was the man who walked into a room and changed the weather. If he signed this, that man ceased to exist. If he signed this, he became an employee. He became a figurehead. He became subject to the oversight of the daughter he had dismissed as soft. His hand trembled. He lowered the pen, resting it on the paper without making a mark. He looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a sudden, desperate panic. It was the look of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, realizing that the parachute he packed was sewn by someone he had mistreated. "Addison," he said, his voice quiet, "are we sure this is the only way?" Marion shifted in her seat. She knew the numbers. She knew they were dead in the water without this, but she stayed silent, letting the moment hang between father and daughter. Grant looked around the room, perhaps hoping for Howard Keene to burst in with a magical solution. But Howard was gone, resigned in disgrace, leaving only the wreckage of his sabotage. "I cannot just give it up," Grant whispered. "It is my name. I did not beg. I did not try to convince him. I did not appeal to his logic or his wallet. I had already done that. This was not a negotiation about money anymore. It was a test of character." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. I looked out at the city, turning my back on the table for a moment. It was a gesture of supreme confidence, or perhaps supreme indifference. "If you walk away—" "Grant," I said, speaking to the glass, "I will not chase you." I turned back to face him. "I will not sue you. I will not argue. But I will not let those 40 people in St. Louis starve because of your vanity." I looked at Dylan. "If you do not sign, I will initiate the direct hiring protocol at noon. I will hire every associate, every paralegal, and every secretary individually. I will protect your associates another way." The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. This was the twist that finally flipped him. He realized I was no longer negotiating from pain. I wasn't the hurt daughter trying to prove herself. I was the managing partner negotiating from principle. I was going to save the village, whether the mayor agreed to it or not. The only variable left was whether he wanted to be inside the walls or outside of them. Grant looked at Dylan. Dylan nodded, a slow, imperceptible movement that said, "It is over." "Dad?" Grant looked back at me. He saw the resolve in my posture. He saw that I had built a machine that could not be stopped by nostalgia. He took a deep breath. It sounded like a hinge rusting open after years of being sealed shut. He gripped the pen. "God help me," he whispered. He signed. The scratch of the nib on the paper was loud in the quiet room. He signed the first page, then he flipped to the next, and the next. For 10 minutes. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the scratching of ink. He signed away the autonomy. He signed away the veto power. He signed away the past. When he finished, he capped the pen and laid it down. He looked smaller, but he also looked unburdened. The weight of the lie he had been living, the lie that everything was fine, was finally gone. "It is done," I said. I looked at Tessa. "Execute the wire," I commanded, and released the statement. Within seconds, the money moved. The lights in St. Louis would stay on. The predatory lenders were paid off. The Doyle claim was funded. The bleeding stopped. I did not pause for champagne. There is no champagne in a rescue operation. There is only work. Get the St. Louis office on the video wall, I said. The large screen at the end of the room flickered to life. The entire staff of the newly christened Perry Whitman Legal Group was gathered in their conference room. I saw faces I recognized from the personnel files. Young, anxious faces. People who had spent the last month wondering if their paychecks would bounce. I stepped in front of the camera. Grant stood behind me. A shadow in the background. "Good morning," I said. "My name is Addison Perry. I am the managing partner of Sterling & Locke." I did not waste time with platitudes. "As of 10 minutes ago, your firm has been acquired by Sterling & Locke Global." I saw a ripple of fear go through the room on the screen. They thought this was the end. They thought I was the Grim Reaper. I held up a hand. "This is not a liquidation," I said clearly. "This is a stabilization." I picked up the sheet of paper that mattered most. The Associate Protection Protocol, effective immediately. The salaries of all associates and support staff are being increased by 20% to match the San Francisco market standard. Gasps were audible through the speakers. 20% was life-changing money for them. Furthermore, I continued, we are instituting an 18-month retention guarantee. No one loses their job today. No one loses their job tomorrow. We are clearing the firm's debts, settling the outstanding liabilities, and investing $5 million in technology upgrades for your office. I looked directly into the camera lens. You have been working under a cloud of uncertainty. That cloud is gone. We are here to work. Then, I did something Grant never would have done. I looked at the list of names, the hidden talent that my data team had identified, the people who were doing the work while the partners played golf. I want to announce the immediate promotion of Sarah Jenkins, David Thorne, and Michael Ross to junior partner. I said, "Your billing records and client feedback scores are exceptional. You have been overlooked for too long. That ends today." I saw a young woman in the back row cover her mouth with her hand, tears springing to her eyes. She had probably been planning to quit that week. Now, she was a partner. And finally, I said, "I am appointing Dylan Perry as the head of litigation for the street. Lewis office." Grant's head snapped up. He hadn't known about this part. Dylan stepped into the frame on our side of the video link. He looked at the camera. He didn't look like the chosen one anymore. He didn't look like the golden boy carrying his father's expectations. He looked like a lawyer who had just helped save 40 families. He looked competent. "Thank you." "Addison," Dylan said, "we are ready to get to work." The feed cut. The room in San Francisco was quiet again. Grant stared at me. "You promoted them?" he asked. "Jenkins? She is just a grinder. She doesn't have the pedigree. She bills 2,400 hours a year and her briefs are flawless." I said coldly, "Pedigree is a luxury. Grant, performance is a necessity. You missed her because you were looking for mirrors, not windows." The combined firm meeting, the town hall, was scheduled for noon. This was the ceremonial passing of the torch. We gathered in the atrium of the San Francisco office. With the St. Louis team dialing in again, Grant walked up to the podium. Old habits die hard. He adjusted his tie. He tapped the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces, my partners, his former employees, and he smiled that practiced politician smile. He wanted to spin this. He wanted to tell a story about how this was all his idea, a strategic masterstroke to expand his empire. He wanted to be the center one last time. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice booming. "Today marks a glorious new chapter." I stepped forward. I did not ask for permission. I simply took the space. I walked up to the podium and placed my hand on the microphone stand, gently but firmly lowering it to my height. Grant stopped. He looked at me, confused. I looked at him. My eyes were clear. "Sit down," they said. He hesitated. Then, slowly, he stepped back. He retreated into the background, where he belonged. I took the microphone. "We are not here to tell stories about glory," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. "We are here to talk about reality." I looked at the crowd. "The legal profession is not a country club," I said. "It is a service. It is a brutal, demanding, high-stakes service. And for a long time, the Perry Whitman firm forgot that." I did not look at Grant, but everyone knew who I was talking about. They forgot that tradition is not a business model. They forgot that you cannot treat talent like a disposable resource. They forgot that when you stop moving, you start dying. I paused. The room was deadly silent. People do not fail because they are weak. I said, I let the words hang there. They fail because they refuse to adapt. They fail because they cling to an old version of the world that no longer exists, and then they ask others to pay the price for their denial. I looked at Dylan, standing in the front row. "We stopped that today," I said. "We stopped the denial. We paid the price so that the innocent didn't have to." I turned slightly, acknowledging Grant for the first time. "We honor the history that built the foundation," I said, "but we build the future on results." I ended the meeting with 2 words: get to work. The crowd dispersed. The energy was electric, not the nervous energy of a crisis, but the buzzing, kinetic energy of a machine that had finally been oiled and turned on. I went back to my office. I needed a moment of silence. I stood by the window, watching the fog roll in over the Golden Gate Bridge, obscuring the world in a soft, white blanket. There was a knock on the door. It was Grant. He did not stride in this time. He walked in slowly. He looked older than he had in the morning. But it wasn't a frail oldness. It was the weathering of a man who has finally been exposed to the elements. He stood in front of my desk. He did not sit. "Addison," he said. I turned to face him. "Yes." Grant. He looked at the floor, then at the bookshelf, and finally, he forced himself to look at me. I listened to your speech, he said. And? You were right, he said. The admission hung in the air. It was a small thing, 3 words, but for a man like Grant Perry, it was the equivalent of climbing Everest. I was wrong about the market. He said, I was wrong about the firm. He swallowed hard. And I was wrong about you. He took a step forward. I thought you were soft. He said, I thought you ran away because you couldn't handle the fight. But you didn't run away. You just went to a different battlefield. And you won. He looked at me with a strange mixture of shame and pride. You are the best lawyer the family ever produced, he said. I looked at him. 30 years ago. Those words would have been the only thing I wanted in the world. I would have traded my soul for them. I would have begged for them. But now, they were just a fact. They were a data point. They were validation. Yes, but they were not oxygen. I had learned to breathe on my own a long time ago. I know. I said, I did not say thank you. I did not cry. I simply acknowledged the truth. Grant nodded. He seemed to understand that he couldn't bridge the gap completely. The years of neglect couldn't be erased with one compliment. So, he said, adjusting his coat, what happens now? Now, I said, you go back to St. Louis. You sit in your office. You act as the chairman. You shake hands. You kiss babies. But you let Dylan and the committee run the firm. I walked over to my desk and picked up a file. We can rebuild something. Grant, I said. I held his gaze. But it will not be the old story. The old story is over. The story where you are the hero and everyone else is a prop? That book is closed. I handed him the file. It was the first assignment for the Oversight Committee, a list of community outreach programs I wanted the St. Louis office to fund. This is the new story, I said. It is a story about service, and in this story, you do what I tell you. Grant looked at the file. He looked at me. A small, wry smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was the smile of a man who realized he had been checkmated by a grandmaster. Understood. Managing partner, he said. He turned and walked out of the office. I watched him go. I watched the door click shut. I was alone in the silence of the 44th floor. I looked down at the city I had conquered. I thought about the 9-year-old girl in the backyard, trying to be invisible. I thought about the woman standing here now, visible to everyone. I sat down at my desk. I pulled a fresh legal pad toward me. I picked up my pen. The knot had resolved. The debt was paid. The ending was written. And for the first time in my life, the page in front of me was completely blank, waiting for whatever I decided to write next. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope you enjoyed this journey of ambition, betrayal, and the cold, hard justice of the corporate world. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from a high-rise office, a quiet bedroom, or maybe during your commute? Please leave a comment below and let me know your location and your thoughts on Addison's Revenge. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel Lucy Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can get this story out to as many people as possible. Your support means the world to me. Stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.